Chapter 81, Ravenclaw's Diadem. After Arthur destroyed the remaining fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul that had been hiding inside Ravenclaw's diadem, he had possession of the relic itself. To him, the diadem was on the same level as Gryffindor's sword, an heirloom of the founders with unique properties. He hadn't yet recovered Hufflepuff's cup, so he couldn't say if that trophy had any special powers, but legend held that Ravenclaw's diadem enhanced the wearer's wisdom. After all, Ravenclaw's dictum was, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." When Arthur tried it on, the legend proved misleading. Wisdom wasn't a measurable statistic a wizard could raise like an attribute in a game. Rowena Ravenclaw herself had been wise. The circlet did not make someone wise. What it did, much more practically, was let the wearer construct an inner library linked to their own memories and store it within the diadem. It made retrieving memorized knowledge far faster and reduced mistakes caused by faulty recollection. Many of Ravenclaw's insights were preserved in the diadem, though Hogwarts's library contained nearly all the same material. For a scholar like Arthur, who spent his life studying, that was an enormous convenience. No more wasting hours searching stacks or misremembering a crucial detail. Naturally, he had no intention of turning such an instrument over. He planned to add a removable outer casing to the diadem, not to harm the original, but to disguise it. The circlet's design, delicate, studded with sparkling jewels, was unmistakably feminine, and Arthur felt awkward wearing something so ornate. It would also be prudent to inform any rightful heirs about the alteration, so there would be no dispute between his descendants and Hogwarts later, much like the controversy that sometimes surrounded Gryffindor's sword. Ravenclaw had no living descendants, but the house's resident ghost, the Grey Lady, was Rowena's daughter, Helena Ravenclaw. Helena had been a rebellious young witch who once longed to outshine her mother. She stole the diadem as a symbol of that ambition and fled to Albania. Rowena never publicly announced its theft. Years later, gravely ill and wishing to see her daughter one last time, Rowena sent a man who loved Helena, Barrow, to retrieve her. A quarrel ended in tragedy. Barrow struck Helena dead, then, consumed by remorse, took his own life. He became Slytherin's ghost, the Bloody Baron. Arthur could only pity Rowena. Her love and strength had been squandered in a family tragedy. Helena herself was not cruel. She had been left vulnerable by pride and fear. She had wanted to prove herself, and when she made a terrible mistake, she was too ashamed to return and confess. That shame shaped her ghostly existence. Helpful at times, such as when she aided Harry in the past, but also susceptible to deceit. Tom Riddle had taken advantage of her once, coaxing the diadem's hiding place from her. Arthur knew Helena's story and the role it had played in the diadem's long absence. One weekend, he climbed Ravenclaw Tower and sought her out. He found the Grey Lady drifting some inches above the common room floor, hair and robes as ethereal as always. He bowed slightly. "The Grey Lady," he said quietly. "I've recovered something I think concerns you. May I speak with you in private?" Helena's expression was cool, almost contemptuous. "I can't help you," she said. The memory of Tom Riddle surfaced in her mind, a smooth, flattering Slytherin who had promised to return the diadem, then vanished after graduating. She had been betrayed before. She was not inclined to trust strangers now. Around them, students from Ravenclaw began to gather. Curiosity piqued. Arthur waited until more of them pressed in, then casually lifted an inner fold of his robes. The diadem lay there, gleaming. At the sight of it, Helena stiffened. She had lived in the shadow of that shape for 1,000 years. The cast of Rowena's statue in the common room had made that outline familiar. "You?" She sounded small for the first time in a long while. Her voice trembled. Arthur drew his robe closed, as if the moment were private, and repeated, "Madam Helena Ravenclaw, may we have a word?" Her reserve broke. "Of course." She descended, hovering closer until the chill of a ghost's air brushed his face and reached as if she might touch the circlet. She could not physically handle it. Ghosts could not affect the material world. Still, she wanted to be near it. "Let us go somewhere private," she breathed. Arthur led her to an empty classroom. He shut the windows and once more revealed the diadem under Helena's eager gaze. Seeing it so plainly, all at once she was a young woman again, vulnerable with longing and regret. "How did you find it?" she whispered. "It was hidden in a magical room on the 8th floor. Arthur said, simply and honestly. Helena's fingers trembled where they hovered. I told a Slytherin, Tom Riddle, where I'd left it. He promised to bring it back, and then he vanished. Arthur used the moment to explain his plan. He would add an outer covering to the diadem that could be removed at any time, leaving the original untouched. It would make wearing the circlet less conspicuous and protect it, while ensuring its authenticity remained intact. He would also make sure the change was reversible, so no harm came to Rowena's relic. As a ghost, Helena could do nothing to safeguard the diadem physically. Guarding it only increased the chance it would be stolen again. What she had wanted all these years was simply to see it, to know it had not been lost forever. The thought of the diadem returned and preserved softened her, and she agreed without hesitation. May I see it more often? She asked, voice small. Arthur nodded. He understood her need. She had carried regret for a millennium. A few moments of peace were owed to her. He resolved to keep the diadem protected, disguised, and available to the one who had loved it enough to live and die for it, even if she could no longer touch it. 82. Rowena Ravenclaw. Arthur agreed without hesitation. He even produced his wand and levitated Ravenclaw's diadem so that when Helena reached out, it would feel as if she were actually touching it. Helena stared at the floating circlet and with a trembling hand reached forward. The moment her fingers passed through the metal, the jewel at its center flared with white light. Arthur felt the diadem grow suddenly heavy. He hadn't time to adjust the levitation charm and the circlet plunged to the classroom floor. The gem's light intensified until a soul-like figure emerged from it, an apparition that could have been Helena, if not for its unmistakable likeness to Rowena Ravenclaw herself. "Mama," Helena whispered, voice choking with a tangle of joy, relief, and fear. The light condensed into a more solid form. Rowena appeared as a stunning woman with long hair like Helena's and robes the color of deep blue, a faint, almost teasing smile on her lips. Her eyes were crystalline, clear and piercing as a spring. They seemed to take in everything at once. She scanned the room, glanced briefly at the diadem on the floor, then at Arthur, and finally fixed her gaze on Helena. "My child, let me see," she said. She stepped forward and embraced Helena, her hand drifting over the wound in Helena's chest, the wound Barrow had inflicted that had killed her. Even as a ghost, the injury remained a cruel, visible thing. "I'm sorry, Mama. I shouldn't have taken your diadem, and I shouldn't have left and never come back," Helena confessed, clinging to Rowena. Her mother's arms washed away her fear, leaving only the weight of regret. Rowena stroked her daughter's hair. "No," she murmured. "It was always meant for you. The moment you took it, it was yours. I misjudged my illness. I sent Barrow to find you, but then I weakened and could not see you again." Rowena explained gently to Arthur, who had been watching in stunned silence. "Before I died, I hid a small piece of my soul in the room of requirement, the control chamber not far from the headmaster's office, hoping I might see Helena one last time. I did not expect the diadem to be so corrupted. It had a soul inside it as well. Fortunately, you dealt with that spirit, and I was able to attach myself to the diadem and leave the room of requirement." Helena's voice trembled. "Mama, are you a ghost now?" Rowena shook her head. "No, not a ghost. Only a fragment of my soul remains here. I will take you with me when I go, and on the other side, I will keep you safe." She turned to Arthur. "Young Slytherin, do me another favor. Take us to the entrance of the room of requirement." Arthur carried the diadem immediately and led them to the room's entrance. When the diadem began to glow, a large, ornate iron door appeared in the wall, embossed with the Ravenclaw emblem, 2 blue eagles in flight. When it opened, Arthur saw inside a 2-story villa set on a tidy lawn beside a small lake, a miniature forest beyond, a tiny Hogwarts of its own. As they entered, Rowena's form separated from the diadem again. She took Helena's hand and stood at a window. "This is the Chamber of Secrets I made for us after you left," she said. "I knew you always wanted a Hogwarts that belonged only to you." "Mother, I was wrong," Helena said, voice small. "Let the past be just that," Rowena replied. "It can follow us like a shadow, but you must not carry it as a burden." After she comforted her daughter, Rowena led Arthur to a small room on the 2nd floor. It contained only a floating glass sphere and a wand. "This is the control room," she explained. That sphere draws magic from Hogwarts itself. It supplies power to the Chamber of Secrets by absorbing ambient magic. This control room and the villa can exist independently, even if others use the chamber. To enter this chamber from outside, you need only repeat Helena Ravenclaw silently 3 times. After that, the chamber and the diadem will belong to you. Whether you keep them, pass them to your descendants, or offer them to Hogwarts, those are your choices to make. To seal her words, Rowena even signed a contract with Arthur, making clear the ownership had passed to him. After making the arrangement, she prepared to leave. She gathered power through the glass sphere. Magic visibly surged and a vortex of energy formed above Hogwarts, drawing the castle's magic into the control room. When she had amassed enough, she tapped the air with her wand and a door opened, an aperture that looked as if reality itself had been ripped. "You may observe," she said, smiling at Arthur, "but do not enter. I only ever glimpsed this place in life. There is much I still do not understand." She took Helena's hand and stepped through. Helena passed through Arthur as a ghost and could not hug him. Instead, she bowed. Arthur stayed back as instructed, taking up a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone and standing ready to act should danger come. On the other side of the doorway, a thick gray mist swirled. After a few minutes, the mist parted in the center to reveal a path more than 50 meters long. A wooden bridge of nearly 10 meters spanned a black river below, its surface littered with indistinct floating objects. The path was flanked by rows of bare black trees, their branches empty of leaves. At the far side of the bridge, another Rowena Ravenclaw walked out, alive as any living woman. She closed her eyes and reached for the Rowena who had entered. The 2 figures touched and merged until there was only one woman again, fully solid and very much living. She opened her eyes, assessed Arthur with a quick, appraising glance, and smiled. "If we meet again when you die, perhaps there will be a free afterlife for you. If you wish, you may come find us." She broke off a nearby branch and fitted it along the wand Helena had brought to make a simple pointer. Then she tossed it back through the doorway into the control room and added, "Time presses. I cannot explain everything, and it would be of no use. These are choices you make after death. I look forward to our next meeting." As she spoke, the door began to close. Through the narrowing opening, Arthur saw Rowena leading a bewildered Helena away, the mist swallowing them. In the last moments before the door sealed, a cloaked figure materialized and drew the mist into his hand, shaping it into a long spear. He hurled it down the path. It grew as it flew, absorbing more mist, then struck a large tree and dissolved back into vapor. The figure turned and looked directly at Arthur. It was an ordinary, almost kindly face, an old man of 70 or 80, yet the sight chilled Arthur so deeply he clutched the Philosopher's Stone fragment until it bit his palm. He could not shake the certainty that the man might be death. The figure only glanced at him, and then the doorway shut. Arthur sank against the control room door, breathless. The revelations of the day were too much. A living Rowena restored, a soul fragment, a private chamber that siphoned power from Hogwarts, and a passage to an afterlife guarded by beings that threw spears of mist. Dumbledore had been right. To a clear-minded person, death was another great adventure. Arthur now knew with near certainty that when a wizard dies, the soul can move on to a new world, and that new world has its own dangers and its own overseers. 83. News about the Horcrux. After Rowena Ravenclaw and her daughter left, Arthur closed the control room and went to inspect the true room of requirement. The small villa that Ravenclaw had prepared for her daughter was not only lavishly furnished, but astonishingly real. The grass and the lake outside were living and breathing. Fish swam in the water, butterflies and wildflowers dotted the lawn, and the sunlight in the sky matched the light outside the castle as if it were reflected from somewhere beyond Hogwarts. Faced with such a convincing refuge, Arthur moved all of his belongings from the room he'd been staying in and decided to make this villa his permanent lodging. When he needed a break, he could stroll the lawn or sit by the lake. By the time he left, it was evening. After dinner, he went to the headmaster's office. Ravenclaw's resident ghost was gone. Dumbledore should be told. The house ghosts taught many of the younger students much of what they knew. Arthur arrived and tapped the statue by the door. The office opened. Dumbledore wasn't at his desk, but lounging in his chair, happily eating a pile of cockroach clusters. "Arthur?" Dumbledore beamed. "You don't come unless it's important. What's happened now?" As he spoke, a memory slipped into Dumbledore's mind. The magic vortex that had appeared over Hogwarts that afternoon. An enormous surge of power. Even as headmaster, he only knew that a great deal of magic had poured into the castle. He didn't know where it had gone. Arthur's sudden visit, after such a stir, put Dumbledore slightly on edge. Whatever required that much magic could not be trifling. Arthur recounted the day's events to the best of his ability, leaving out only the final scene he'd witnessed, but he did not hide the crucial detail. He had destroyed the soul contained in Ravenclaw's diadem. He explained how it had been bound to the diadem and that Tom Riddle had been the previous wizard to handle it. In Arthur's mind, this confirmed a long-suspected truth. Lord Voldemort had created Horcruxes. Dumbledore's expression changed as Arthur spoke. The idea that the Grey Lady and Ravenclaw had departed the world together stunned him. A ghost who had chosen to stay, continuing on with the aid of a deceased person, was unheard of in recent history. That it was Rowena Ravenclaw, one of Britain's most brilliant wizards, made it less surprising, but no less remarkable. Hearing that a soul had been bound in the diadem and that Tom Riddle had been involved matched several of the suspicions Dumbledore had already harbored about Voldemort. "Arthur, can you show me Ravenclaw's diadem?" Dumbledore asked, voice suddenly sharp with interest. "Of course, Professor." Arthur took the diadem from his robes and handed it to Dumbledore. The old man's fingers, still steady in their curiosity, brushed the gems and metal. His perception picked up traces of charms and binding magic, the stench of dark arts and the telltale marks of Horcrux creation. Since becoming headmaster, he had quietly removed extreme dark arts texts from the restricted section and had long studied the theory behind Horcruxes. His knowledge on the subject was deep. He recognized the residual magic at once. After a long look, Dumbledore returned the diadem and spoke evenly. "You did well to recover it, Arthur, but if you find anything like this again, tell me first. Items handled by Voldemort are likely to be cursed." Arthur nodded. Even Dumbledore had been harmed by Horcruxes. A single resurrection stone had cost him years of his life. It was strange, Arthur thought, that only the Horcruxes Dumbledore had encountered alone had seemed lethal to him, while others merely injured him. Still, the warning was sensible. Before Dumbledore could add anything, Arthur continued, "Professor, before I found the diadem, I'd already encountered 2 other items like it." Dumbledore's face went pale with sudden excitement. In his flurry, his hand knocked the plate of cockroach clusters on his desk, and they spilled across the table, scattering. For a moment, every hair on Arthur's arms rose to attention. Dumbledore steadied himself, waved a wand, and had the cockroaches gather back onto the plate. One fat cockroach, however, had blended in with the morsels. Distracted, Dumbledore reached up, popped it into his mouth, and immediately regretted it. There was a wet popping sound. Dumbledore's features contorted. A foul, fishy, and vaguely rotten odor filled the air. Arthur slid his chair back several paces. Dumbledore spat the insect out, rinsed his mouth, then, as if to recover his dignity, ate several more cockroach clusters before settling back. He said afterwards, forcing a rueful chuckle. "Cockroach clusters and actual cockroaches do look very similar at a glance. Happens to the best of us." Arthur managed a tight smile. Dumbledore wiped his lips and fixed Arthur with an eager look. "Right. You said there were 2 others. Tell me everything." 84. Who is the savior? Arthur sat back in a chair and told Dumbledore again about the diary and Slytherin's locket. "The first strange object I found was a diary," he said. "Its previous owner was Tom Riddle, the Slytherin the Grey Lady told me about. The diary had a consciousness of its own and even tried to tempt me to feed it small animals. I judged it a dark artifact and destroyed it. The second was Slytherin's locket, which I recovered from the House of Black's vault. It was like Ravenclaw's diadem, not a thinking thing like the diary, but it held a fragment of a soul." As a cautious Slytherin, Arthur never told Dumbledore where he'd found the locket. There was no point in saying it now. The person involved was dead. Even if Dumbledore announced the truth, it wouldn't change most people's minds about the House of Black. It would be as plausible as Dumbledore claiming Lucius Malfoy had opposed Voldemort. People would call him senile. Dumbledore had protected Snape for years, but his reputation never recovered. Personality had a lot to do with that. Likewise, Dumbledore, whose influence had waned somewhat, could not right away clear Regulus Black's name in the eyes of the older generation. But there would be an opportunity soon. Sirius was about to escape Azkaban. Once the truth behind Sirius's case came out, it would be simple to restore Regulus's reputation. Two brothers, one Slytherin, one Gryffindor, had supported and opposed Voldemort, respectively. In reality, both had resisted him, and both had been treated unjustly. That kind of story, once it was told through businesses tied to the House of Black, would turn many opinions around. Who said heroes only stood in the light? After Arthur finished explaining the other Horcruxes he'd destroyed, Dumbledore sighed. This is staggering. I think you've already guessed it. Tom Riddle is the one who became Lord Voldemort. He tapped his wand in the air, and the name Tom Marvolo Riddle unrolled like ink. Rearrange those letters, and you get... With a sweep of his hand, the letters shifted, forming the phrase, I am Lord Voldemort. He used a wicked dark spell, Dumbledore said. By killing another, he split his soul and hid the fragments in objects. Those objects are called Horcruxes. As long as any Horcrux survives, he cannot truly die. His body may be destroyed, but his soul endures. So the 3 items I destroyed were Horcruxes? Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. Exactly. Dumbledore nodded. You astonish me. 3 Horcruxes in less than a year. But it seems he made more. Slytherin's locket and Ravenclaw's diadem are both heirlooms of the founders. Hufflepuff's cup is missing, and might also have been turned into a Horcrux. If we have targets, we should be able to find them, Arthur said. Yes, at least now we have a direction. Dumbledore picked up a pen and began making notes in a small notebook. 3 known Horcruxes. Tom's diary, personal items as vessels. Ravenclaw's diadem and Slytherin's locket, historical relics, possible use of the founders' heirlooms. He leaned back and, oddly enough, returned to his snack. Clusters of candied cockroaches. As he popped them in his mouth, he appreciated the little bursts of syrup. The cockroaches themselves popped too, but it was the sweet center he seemed to enjoy. While he munched, he thought about Arthur. The boy's growth had been alarmingly fast, so fast Dumbledore could scarcely imagine the power he might have at maturity. He might surpass both Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Harry Potter, the child named in the prophecy as the Savior, already seemed far behind Arthur. When Harry grew up, could he defeat Voldemort, or would Arthur by then be strong enough to meet Voldemort on equal terms? The words of the prophecy drifted into Dumbledore's mind. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore reviewed Arthur's details. Arthur, too, seemed to have been born at the end of July. Harry bore the lightning-shaped scar from Voldemort. Arthur bore the unicorn's curse left by the Dark Lord, a kind of mark, too. Harry had the power of love that Voldemort did not understand. Arthur had a strange lightning energy of his own, a magic whose nature even Dumbledore did not comprehend. Only one line of the prophecy gave Dumbledore pause. Born to those who have thrice defied him. Did any members of Arthur's family meet that criterion? He searched his memories of the House of Black. Most of the previous generation had been Death Eaters. Sirius was the exception, but the Ministry's account of his case was false. Sirius himself refused to tell the full truth and chose Azkaban, so there was little Dumbledore could do. Regulus Black's actions were little known, and in most eyes the House of Black remained tainted. That meant the family did not clearly fit the prophecy's condition. By this measure, the prophecy still pointed to Harry Potter. Neville Longbottom lacked a mark and any extraordinary power. Arthur Black and Neville did not fulfill all the prophecy's details. Still, Dumbledore could not ignore Arthur's potential. The boy's talent and courage were among the most remarkable he had ever seen. Even if Arthur was not the prophesied one, it would be wise to protect him while he grew. Dumbledore folded his notes away and set his mind to contingency plans. Whether or not Arthur was the savior, safeguarding him as he came into his power was not a bad course of action. Because Tom Riddle's diary hadn't stirred trouble at Hogwarts this year, the first half of the second year flew by, and Christmas holiday came around quickly. This time, Arthur chose to go home instead of staying at school. As he and the other younger students boarded the Hogwarts Express, Professor Lockhart, who had been doing autograph sessions at school every day, surprisingly got on the train with them. The younger students had no choice but to take the train. They couldn't apparate, so the Express was their only link to the outside world. Professors, of course, knew apparition and almost never wasted time on trains. They usually apparated to Hogsmeade and continued from there. But Lockhart was Lockhart, eccentric in all things. Arthur's opinion of him had shifted over the past term. Lockhart sometimes managed the competence expected of a defense against the dark arts teacher, but just as often he seemed little more than a showman. He had also grown noticeably thinner, to the point of looking emaciated, as if addicted to something. Everything about him screamed that something was wrong. Still, the students were used to oddities in the wizarding world. Lockhart was just another eccentric, and not nearly as brilliant as his books made him out to be. Once the compartment door closed, Draco immediately started complaining. Lockhart's not a proper professor at all. His lessons are worse than Professor Quirrell's. He tells stories every day, and his charms demos keep going wrong. I'll ask Father to get him replaced when I go back. He hasn't made any fatal mistakes, Arthur said slowly, pulling a palm-sized unicorn figurine from his pocket. The little statuette was made from a milky white stone and crafted with tiny rotating joints at the head and legs. Arthur had made it for Charlotte. Charlotte had agreed to follow Arthur by staying inside his wand, but Arthur didn't see her as a tool. He'd built the unicorn doll so she could have a body she could move in. Charlotte hadn't learned soul projection, so the time she could spend inhabiting the doll each day was limited. But it was enough. She bounced around like a puppy and loved it. "What is that?" Draco asked, peering as the tiny unicorn clambered over the table. "It's not a toy," Arthur said. "It's controlled by a real soul. If you wanted one, I could make it for you, but you'd have to provide a willing soul." Draco's mouth fell open. "A soul? Is that dark arts? Always dark arts?" Arthur replied dryly. "No, this is alchemy. Think of it as a prosthetic for a disabled body." "I see," Draco said, crestfallen. "I don't have a soul to spare, and neither does my father." Draco reached out, and Charlotte, proud despite lacking a body, dodged his hand with contempt. She wouldn't let a young man with slicked-back blonde hair handle her. Even without a body, she kept her dignity. Charlotte squeezed behind Arthur's fingers and mouthed something silently. Arthur soothed her with his free hand. The doll still had limitations. It couldn't let Charlotte make audible sounds. A ward at Hogwarts prevented the use of Muggle-style electrical devices and similar equipment, so Arthur couldn't make the doll speak or sing. For now, he relied on purely alchemical methods, and he hoped to improve the design over time. These sorts of dolls were an important direction for Arthur's alchemical research. Voldemort's soul fragments, in particular, were surprisingly useful, like programmable modules. When Arthur built alchemical items that incorporated fragments of soul, he could program simple instructions into them. Those fragments would then trigger the effects carved into the item's rune circuitry, networks of connected ancient runes, according to the preset instructions. Ancient runes alone could do automatic activations, but soul fragments made the items smarter. They could learn new trigger methods in a way similar to training a dog, upgrading their behavior without requiring structural changes to the device. Arthur had already used Nicholas Flamel's alchemical methods to build a magical defense necklace, and after a term of iterative improvements, it was very close to a finished product. It worked well enough in ordinary duels, but against witches and wizards of McGonagall's or Snape's caliber, it was less effective. High-frequency assault spells confused the necklace. Instead of defending, it would flail like a headless fly, obscuring the wearer's vision and becoming a liability rather than protection. The only path forward was continued refinement of the rune circuits inside it. Arthur placed great importance on defensive alchemical tools. The wizarding world was sliding toward chaos, and a simple oversight on the road could cost a person their life. Good defensive gear could keep a wizard alive until they were ready to fight. Amid Arthur's teasing of Charlotte and the younger students' chatter, the train reached the station. Lockhart, assuming a professor's presence should draw admiration, was the first to step down. He expected cheers, but his gaunt appearance and the way parents were already focused on finding their children meant no one paid him any attention. Mortified, he dropped his head and hurried toward the carriages. As usual, Arthur declined the Malfoys' invitation to go to their manor straight away. He planned to visit them the day after tomorrow. He wanted to spend Christmas at home. The holiday was as important as a Muggle's spring festival to him, and it would be a good chance to take care of House of Black affairs there. With Kreacher preparing a sumptuous meal that night, Arthur had time to enjoy an evening at home and then properly celebrate Christmas the next day. After bidding farewell to the Malfoys at the station, Arthur found a small figure waiting in the crowd, Kreacher, the house elf he'd arranged to meet him. Holding Kreacher's hand, Arthur was quickly led back to 12 Grimmauld Place. Returning after several months away, he felt an enormous relief, and for the first time in a long while, a little lighter. The past few months at Hogwarts had been relentless. Driven by necessity, he had buried himself in study like a true Ravenclaw, mastering one branch of magic, then another, alchemy, then the next discipline, each conquest feeding the next. The pace had felt worse than a 996 grind, but he pushed himself for his own safety. He told himself there would be an end to it. Once he perfected lightning magic and soul magic to Dumbledore's level, or once that noseless wizard Voldemort was gone in a few years, he could finally relax. Christmas morning brought more familiar faces. Lucy and Baru, two house elves Arthur had purchased after becoming the de facto head of the House of Black, returned to the mansion. They'd been busy managing the family's assets in Britain and coordinating certain operations in Europe, and now they'd come to report. Both were young, fiercely loyal, more like efficient stewards than obedient servants, shaped by Arthur's influence since childhood. Kreacher, by contrast, still carried many of the old house elf attitudes. Despite earlier streamlining by the previous generation and Arthur himself, the House of Black remained one of Britain's most ancient and wealthy families. Their holdings in herbs, real estate, and company shares were extensive. Lucy and Baru reported that the family's net profit in Britain for the year had been 39,407 galleons, and in Europe the profits rose to 75,397 galleons, a combined total of 114,804 galleons for the year. That figure didn't include the priceless value of certain ancient magical artifacts and rare raw materials the family kept. As a reward, Arthur gave each of the house elves 1,000 galleons and presented them with new robes, only one grade below the custom robes he had made for himself. He also brought new clothes for Kreacher, but the old elf retained his ingrained servility. After thanking Arthur, Kreacher immediately scolded Lucy and Baru for betraying our ancestors by taking money from their master. He scolded them and then scolded himself, but when Arthur mentioned the honors he intended to bestow on Kreacher after his death, the elf broke into delighted laughter. Christmas passed in familiar comfort. Arthur received the usual gifts, many of them duplicates of things he already had, and sent a few thoughtful presents of his own. A pair of real wool socks to Dumbledore, knit from the fleece of a top-grade sheep, and sweets for various magical beings, including the house elves at the Black Estate and at the Hogwarts kitchens, and even for the vampire professor. He visited the Malfoys once more during the holiday, but otherwise stayed at home. Still, the break felt over in a blink, and soon he was packing once more for Hogwarts. On the Hogwarts Express, he spotted Gilderoy Lockhart again. The famous author and Defense Against the Dark Arts professor looked as if someone had drained him dry, thinner than before the holiday, with deep purple hollows under his eyes, gaunt and listless. Parents, less hurried with the school term beginning, recognized the paper man from the children's talk and swarmed him. 3 layers of anxious admirers pressed around Lockhart. Worried mothers leaned in to touch his sleeve. Narcissa Malfoy craned on tiptoe to see him better. Amid the crowd, a weak voice kept coming from Lockhart. "It's all right. Please don't worry. I'm just a little hurt. Please, let me go. I can't breathe." If a few keen-eared wizards hadn't intervened, Lockhart might easily have been crushed in that crush, and the following morning's headlines would have been dramatic indeed. Shocking! Gilderoy Lockhart, Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor at Hogwarts, Order of Merlin, 3rd Class, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, suffocates under a crowd of admirers. On the train, the younger students debated Lockhart's condition. "You know who curses the Defense Against the Dark Arts chair," one pureblood boy said. "No one lasts a second year." "What? Really? Then we'll have a new professor next year. Anything would be better than Lockhart, even Quirrell, as long as the dueling club keeps going." "My cousin's cousin's cousin was a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor once," another boy boasted. "Not like Lockhart, though. Lockhart can only write books. My relative used to catch colds all the time when he taught, but he wasn't hurt." In the compartment, Draco and Arthur exchanged their own worried looks about Lockhart. Arthur had noticed the professor's odd behavior over the holidays and had become cautious. No matter what was happening, Arthur resolved to avoid Lockhart's unpredictable attention. Over the coming days, he'd split his time between classes and the room of requirement, choosing his whereabouts at random so Lockhart couldn't find him or set traps. That first night, he bypassed the Slytherin dormitory and went straight to the room of requirement. Once inside, he opened his suitcase and released 10 Feudibats, strange, dangerous creatures he'd kept contained for testing. Feudibats were classified by the Ministry as XXXX level magical creatures. They'd killed wizards, but they were not impossible to tame. Arthur had Baru bring 2 back from abroad to begin taming them as future guard animals for the Black Estate. Whether 12 Grimmauld Place would ever be protected with a Fidelius charm was uncertain, but any ancestral mansion needed security. Dementors were due to be brought into Hogwarts next year, and Arthur wanted to test whether his modified Patronus charm would still work against entities like Feudibats, just as the original Patronus charm repelled Dementors. Feudibats resembled a much larger, more extensible version of a Dementor's cloak, highly flexible and almost indestructible. Their attack method was chillingly simple. They pounced on sleeping prey and smothered them to death. After feeding, a Feudibat would grow thicker and heavier, like a person who had just eaten a large meal. Arthur watched them unfurl in the quiet room, thinking of the tests and training ahead. The 10 Feudibats were disoriented when they first appeared, but the moment they saw Arthur, they swooped low and flew straight toward him. This was their usual movement. On a windy day, they would be even faster. Several of them suddenly expanded, blotting out the windows and plunging the room into shadow, as if the villa had turned from day to night. Arthur set his right hand behind his back, readying Palm Thunder as a backup in case the Patronus failed. With his left, he raised his wand and began the modified Patronus charm. A shaft of white light burst from the tip, filling the room with a faint glow, and from that glow, a giant unicorn stepped forth. Its translucent form shone a pure white, like moonlight behind clouds, radiating a solemn, almost sacred presence. Unlike an ordinary unicorn, it had a pair of large wings, and its body was wrapped in lightning that writhed like silver serpents, appearing and vanishing with startling speed. The long horn on its head glinted like a keen blade, cutting through the darkness the Feudibats had brought with them. The Feudibats immediately recoiled, as if faced with their natural predator. Seeing the Patronus working, Arthur guided the unicorn to circle the 10 creatures. In its presence, the Feudibats collapsed to the ground, weak and sprawled out, far more cowed by a Patronus than by anything else. A Patronus could render them helpless, and when that happened, they had no strength to escape. But it could not kill them. Reducing them to weakness was the Patronus's limit. To slay them, Arthur would need to have mastered Heavenly Thunder. He had another plan. He dispelled the Patronus and summoned a new spell he'd developed from the Patronus charm and soul magic, Soul Guardian. Unlike a Patronus, the Soul Guardian was not merely a phantom. It was a shell of his actual soul. When he cast it, another unicorn appeared, almost identical in form to the first, but far less transparent, more like a living creature, and it did not glow. Arthur tested the Soul Guardian on the Feudibat at the front. To the astonishment of both Arthur and the remaining Feudibats, every time the unicorn struck the creature, it visibly shrank. On the third blow, the Fudabat simply dissipated, like the last wisp of black smoke trailing away after something has burned. Only the tip of the unicorn's horn dimmed slightly. The sight broke the remaining Fudabat's composure. They fell prostrate before Arthur, their black cloaks slapping the floor. It was the first time any of them had seen a wizard who could destroy them, and panic flooded their minds. As mysterious beings that had lived largely unchecked for millennia, Fudabats had rarely encountered wizards capable of casting a Patronus. Few wizards ever learned the charm, and most Fudabats went their whole lives without meeting one. Except for a wizard with a Patronus, they were effectively invulnerable. Their intelligence, freedom, and the lack of other creatures able to harm them had kept them that way. Arthur had suspected Soul Guardian might be lethal to Fudabats, but he had not expected it to be so effortless. With that knowledge, he realized he could, if he wished, wipe out the species during a single walk outside. Dementors, being similar in some ways, would probably be vulnerable to Soul Guardian as well, something that eased Arthur's mind about the Dementors he expected at Hogwarts next year. He composed himself and spoke, directing the Fudabats. "From now on, you'll guard my home. I'll set aside a place for you to live and provide food." The 9 Fudabats nodded. Most wizards couldn't truly understand the languages of magical creatures. At best, they could sense simple emotions, but many magical creatures could understand spoken wizards' words, provided they weren't specialized jargon. These Fudabats understood him well enough to accept. Arthur continued, thinking of Draco. "I'll give one of you an opportunity. One will act as a sparring partner for a time. You'll be allowed only to be struck and not to fight back. After no more than 6 months, I'll grant that one its freedom." At the promise of eventual freedom, one Fudabat flew forward eagerly and bobbed repeatedly. "Good, you've agreed. Don't go back on your word," Arthur said and reached out to stroke it. Its fur was smooth and a little damp, like a wet raincoat. The chosen Fudabat lay down obediently and even wagged its tail in a fawning way, like a puppy. Seeing it behave so like a loyal pet made Arthur briefly crave a dog of his own. Most of the large magical dogs he'd seen were unattractive, some literally covered in thorns, and magical big cats, such as the white tiger, were already extinct. Otherwise, he might have taken one of those. The other Fudabats, who would not be the sparring partner, accepted their fate. This wizard could kill them, but he promised food, shelter, and life in return for service. In the end, lying prostrate and being cared for didn't seem so bad. 88. Xiaolong's patron saint is not a dragon. The next day, Arthur sent for Draco. Draco was almost taken aback when he stepped into the new room of requirement. The previous room had even had a fake sun outside. This one went further, a stretch of grass, a lake with fish, and a distant forest. It felt like a miniature Hogwarts. Watching the fish swim, Draco found himself thinking it wouldn't be so bad to flatten Hogwarts and build a small villa here. Mountains and water, a lovely view. He could plant flowers, keep fish, even go hunting in the Forbidden Forest, or study unknown magical beasts. Best of all, he could fly on a broom freely above the fake sky. After admiring the scene, Draco didn't press Arthur about how he had arranged it. Instead, he turned to him with concern. "Arthur, is something wrong? This is the middle of Quidditch season. Training's important. The match is coming up soon. Slytherin has to take first place this year." Official Quidditch matches were clustered in the second half of the school year. They usually began about a month after term started and ran until roughly a month before finals. During that time, each house's team practiced on weekends, and sometimes they even argued over practice slots. The hottest rivalry was between Slytherin and Gryffindor. Last year, Slytherin had lost to Gryffindor, allowing them to win the cup. Before that, the cup had almost always been Slytherin's, until Harry Potter, an extraordinary young seeker, arrived in Gryffindor. Even as a first year, he was allowed on the team and dominated matches in a way that made Slytherin's superior equipment irrelevant. Given the sort of dominance Harry showed in canon, Draco worried his own training might be meaningless. And this time, Dobby wouldn't be around to cause trouble. Arthur, however, couldn't bluntly tell him that. "I found a new charm," Arthur said. "After I learned it, I was able to summon a unicorn Patronus. Want to learn it? It won't take your whole weekend. 2 or 3 evenings a week will be enough." He drew his wand and produced his Patronus. It was a unicorn as tall as a grown wizard, with wings and crackling streaks of light along its flanks. Draco's eyes went bright. Of course I want to learn that. It's brilliant. Arthur smiled. He hadn't promised that every student would be able to conjure a unicorn Patronus. He only said he could. Most wizards would call up an ordinary animal as a Patronus: a snake, a peacock, a ferret. Arthur wanted Draco to learn the Patronus charm because it would give him a measure of protection next year and in years to come. In the current wizarding world, a Patronus is seen as a sign of powerful magic and of a righteous heart. That could matter if the Malfoys ever came under suspicion. Casting a strong Patronus might sway some members of the Wizengamot who acted on appearances. In truth, though, anyone with love in their heart and confidence can produce a Patronus. Dolores Umbridge, whose tastes were notoriously saccharine, had a cat Patronus. Severus Snape summoned the same Patronus as Lily Potter, a doe. That instant, Dumbledore understood the depth of Snape's love for Lily. Over the following weeks, Draco came to Arthur whenever he had free time, even though he still didn't know the spell's formal name. He would thrust his wand up and shout, "Expecto Patronum." At first, the results were pathetic. Draco's wand tip fizzed like a faulty bulb, white light flickering, then nothing. He smiled awkwardly at Arthur. "It's been a month and there's still no progress." "You need to think of something that truly makes you happy when you cast the spell," Arthur said. "I know. I've thought about everything. It's useless," Draco replied dejectedly. Arthur thought for a moment, then brought out the Mirror of Erised. He'd borrowed it from Dumbledore and never returned it. Dumbledore had never mentioned it, so Arthur kept it. He had used the mirror himself when learning the charm and now offered it to Draco. "This mirror shows your deepest desires," he explained. "If you can recall what you see in it when you cast the spell, it often helps." "Really? A mirror like that?" Draco leaned toward it, concentration tightening his face. Soon the silver glass stopped reflecting his present self and showed another scene. He couldn't help grinning. Arthur watched with interest. "What do you see, Draco? You look very pleased." Draco beamed. "I saw the Quidditch match. Slytherin were 60 points down to Gryffindor. I stepped on Potter's face, and under his jealous glare I caught the snitch and we won." "Well, that's not bad," Arthur said. "Imagine that, and try again." Reluctantly, Draco tore his gaze away. The image in the mirror was too sweet a temptation. Arthur's trick worked. This time, when Draco cast the charm, a thin wisp of silvery mist formed at the tip of his wand. It was small, but it was far more than he'd managed before. Draco's confidence brightened at once. He had reached the first stage. Arthur explained the next hurdle. To produce a full Patronus, a protective animal-shaped force, a caster needs something more than happiness. They need love. That love can be for a person or for something else entirely. Arthur himself had used the mirror to reach the first stage and then had agonized over what he loved enough to carry him to the second. He ultimately chose magic itself, the rapture of finding himself in a magical world and the joy of learning spells. Draco was different. He had a loving family and doting parents. Being pampered might have downsides, but it helped him here. If his parents were standing beside him now, he might not even need the mirror. Time passed, and before the Slytherin-Gryffindor match, Draco finally produced a Patronus. Arthur breathed a quiet sigh of relief. He'd feared that a Quidditch loss might crush Draco's spirit. When the Patronus fully formed, it suited Draco perfectly. A peacock. Proud, showy, inquisitive, mischievous, and oddly fragile. The more Arthur thought about it, the more he felt the peacock had been made for Draco. Chapter 89, End of Second Year. The moment Draco summoned his Patronus, he realized Arthur had tricked him. He hadn't produced a unicorn at all, but a peacock. Still, the magnificent bird made him very happy. Like a peacock fanning its tail, he strutted off to the Slytherin common room to show it off. Pleasure, however, is always short-lived. A month before finals, the Quidditch final took place, Slytherin versus Gryffindor. As usual, Slytherin lost, again beaten by Gryffindor. Many of the students were so upset they could barely eat. Worse, final exams were only a month away. The Quidditch players who had spent so much time practicing now stood on the brink of panic. How could they catch up on all their studies in 1 month? Text-based subjects were manageable, Most professors gave clear outlines, and the exams were straightforward. Practical exams, though, charms and transfiguration in particular, were brutal. Students had to line up and perform charms in front of the professor to pass, so the Hogwarts students buckled down. Weekends were given over to study rather than play. At the end of the term, the exam results were posted. Among the second years, Arthur was undisputed, first in the year with a total score far above everyone else. Draco, who had practiced magic with Arthur often, also made the top 10. Unfortunately, individual academic ranks didn't translate into house points. At the final feast, Gryffindor still won the House Cup thanks to their Quidditch bonus points. Harry, as the chief contributor to that victory, was cheered by his housemates. Students from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff joined in. Slytherin's reputation for underhanded tactics had long earned them resentment from the rest of the school, so Gryffindor's victory was celebrated noisily. Dumbledore waved his hand and transformed the Great Hall's decorations from silver and green to fiery red. The giant silver serpent banner above the staff table shifted into the Lion of Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall, Gryffindor's head, beamed with pride. Severus Snape, seated beside her, looked sour. Slytherin's winning streak had been broken. As head of house, he could hardly be pleased. What irritated Snape most was that Harry, the son of James Potter, a Quidditch genius, seemed to have inherited his father's talent for the sport and none of his mother's proficiency in potions. In class, Harry was hopeless. On the Quidditch pitch, he shone. Snape glared at him several times, robbing Harry's triumph of some of its joy. It felt like Snape might be watching for any excuse to dock him points in future. Amid the cheering from the three houses, Slytherin sat in a strained silence. Then suddenly, clapping broke out in the front row. The first hands were Arthur's. Draco, seeing Arthur applaud, followed. He didn't know why Arthur was clapping. Was it some new way of mocking Gryffindor? But if Arthur did it, it couldn't be wrong. Arthur Black, the fabled Ghost King of Slytherin, was a strange figure. After dominating Slytherin and earning that title, he had withdrawn. He attended classes and the year-end feast, but rarely showed up for meals. Even within Slytherin, only Draco really knew his comings and goings. So Arthur's applause drew every eye in the house. Many of the other Slytherins thought he had lost his mind. Wolfgang Roll, who'd been beaten by Arthur before, snapped. He jumped to his feet. "Black, what are you doing? Have you forgotten you're a Slytherin?" he shouted. Arthur stopped clapping and looked at Wolfgang with disdain. "Gryffindor didn't win us by tricks alone. Why shouldn't I applaud? Is that not generosity on my part?" "They stole the house cup that should have been ours," Wolfgang spat. Arthur didn't bother arguing with him. He rose, hauling Draco, who sat on his other side, up with him and turned to face the assembled Slytherins. "What's all this?" he said. "Do you not see me? Do I mean nothing to you?" Wolfgang squared up to him, forgetting the fear Arthur had once inspired. Arthur raised a hand. Lightning seemed to flash in his eyes. "Who are you, to stare at me like that?" he said coldly. "Such a stupid wizard. I don't know how the likes of you keep your place in Slytherin, the house known for cunning." Wolfgang's bravado melted. He broke into a cold sweat, and with a little push from Arthur, he crumpled to the floor. The sight of him sprawled on the ground brought visible relief to several younger Slytherins who had been bullied by Wolfgang. Arthur paid them no more heed. "Don't misunderstand," he said, looking round at the gathered students. "I'm not targeting Wolfgang. My point is, many of you are behaving like mindless trolls, unworthy of Slytherin. We pursue glory. We don't cling to grudges. If you're genuinely convinced Gryffindor beat us, then go work to surpass them instead of sitting here with sulky faces, planning to go home and tell your fathers." Draco's cheeks flushed. He had almost been scolded by Arthur too, but he stayed standing. Fortunate, since he and Arthur were on good terms. 90. Lockhart suddenly disappeared. Arthur had been in Slytherin for 2 years, but he still deeply disliked, and even looked down on, much of what Slytherin had become. Because of the Death Eaters, many of the house's old qualities had been eroded. The ambitious, shrewd, composed, and honor-bound Slytherins of legend were almost gone. The current Slytherins had become more extreme, arrogant, petty, quick to bully the weak and quick to kowtow to the powerful, worshipping blood and influence above all. No wonder the other three houses despised Slytherin and were glad when Gryffindor won the House Cup. In the original stories, the one who most closely matched the old Slytherin ideal was probably Horace Slughorn. Snape showed some of it as well. The rest, frankly, were opportunists. Draco was a case in point, an extreme Slytherin. He constantly stirred trouble. Even after Hagrid's demonstration, he still provoked the Hippogriff. His father, Lucius, behaved similarly, always focused on immediate advantage. He spent years trying to sabotage Dumbledore to look like Voldemort's loyal supporter until Voldemort returned. Then he betrayed Voldemort to save his family and became a pariah. Those choices went against Slytherin self-preservation, but the Malfoys at least had a bottom line: their family. By a strange twist, that ended up being their saving grace. When Arthur spoke up at the feast, he didn't try to argue with the other Slytherins. His words came from personal feeling about the house. Slytherin shouldn't be a byword for evil. Its focus on shrewdness and ambition didn't preclude courage. Arthur didn't want another ending like the final battle in the original tale, when not a single Slytherin youth remained to fight. If a student's parents were active Death Eaters, leaving was understandable, but Slytherin had many half-bloods, and too many of them were gone. The Slytherin commotion didn't draw much attention from the students at large. The other houses were already in an uproar, and Arthur had spoken only sparingly. Most students assumed Arthur was upset that Slytherin hadn't won the House Cup. After all, it was largely thanks to him that Slytherin had taken the cup the previous year. After the end-of-year feast, it was time for the holidays. Arthur planned to rest at home for a few days, then spend some time in France. But on the morning of the first holiday, the defense against the dark arts professor vanished. The first to notice was a young witch who had meant to confess to Lockhart at the feast the night before, only to find him drunk and unconscious. Early that morning, she went to his office, hoping he'd still be groggy enough to listen. She knocked and knocked. There was no reply. Pushing the door open, she found the room immaculate, Lockhart and all his belongings gone. Terrified, she ran to the Great Hall to tell the staff and the other students. Breakfast turned into a hubbub. Maybe he couldn't stand the curse and slipped away last night, some students said, remembering how frail he had looked. Others suggested he had been taken by some creature. Lockhart had been behaving oddly for months. Rumors ran wild. One or two even claimed Lockhart wasn't a wizard at all, but something else. Dumbledore intervened, soothed the rising panic, and the students, eager to go home, were soon boarding the train. On the journey, Draco asked Arthur, curious and unsettled, "What do you think happened to Lockhart? Could it really be that curse?" He did look off. Arthur thought back over Lockhart's last 6 months. In class, the man had practically checked out. He made the students do everything themselves and no longer enacted the dramatics from his books. He skipped the dueling club and had passed those duties to Flitwick. Even the final exams were limited to theory, no practicals. It had seemed like ill health, but combined with his sudden disappearance, those signs looked stranger. Arthur could only say, maybe it really is the curse. We'll see if he turns up. Draco, who had learned to bite his tongue around others, almost called him Voldemort, but caught himself. Then the curse is really powerful, he whispered. Arthur gave a small smile. Powerful or not, that's Dumbledore's problem. I'm sure he'll find someone else to teach defense. There was no denying the curse's potency. Since Harry's arrival, no defense against the dark arts professor had fared well. And yet, oddly, Voldemort had not used that particular hex since his resurrection. When Draco asked, voice trembling, why Arthur kept saying the name, Arthur shrugged. Why be afraid of a man who isn't here? And even if you say his name, it won't make him listen. Draco wasn't comforted. My father says he's not dead and will come back. If he ever found us. The rest of the thought was left unsaid. They didn't talk more about it. Arthur knew that unless the Malfoys were hidden by something like the Fidelius charm, Lucius would be a likely target if Voldemort returned. After the train ride, Arthur lingered and chatted with the Malfoys a while, then returned home with Kreacher. On the second day of the holidays, an unexpected visitor knocked at the Black Manor. Professor Walter Bernhard, the vampire who taught in the Department of Mysteries, arrived on Arthur's doorstep, and to everyone's surprise, he was not alone. With him was Gilderoy Lockhart, the same man who had disappeared that very morning. 91. Blood Slave. Lockhart dusk settled over the House of Black, the mansion sinking into shadow as the sun's last glow faded from the horizon. Walter Bernhard arrived in formal dress, followed by Lockhart, though Lockhart looked more like a ghost than the flamboyant man the wizarding world remembered. His skin clung to his bones, his body drained of flesh. He moved like a puppet. Bernhard held no leash, but Lockhart trailed behind him like a loyal hound. Arthur, watching from inside, felt a chill. Bernhard's presence meant trouble, and judging by Lockhart's condition, whatever it was had been very bad. He took a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone from beneath his robes, the emergency reserve he always kept, and prepared to use it. Arthur's magical offense was now among the most formidable in the wizarding world, but his reserves couldn't sustain long, high-frequency output. The stone would fix that. Out front, Bernhard rapped on the great door of the House of Black. When no one answered, impatience showed. He signaled, and Lockhart lunged forward, pounding the door with his fists. The door was not only grand, but heavily warded. Lockhart's blows only dented it. The noise drew the house's Foodabats, 9 of them, who swept to the entrance, their silky wings fluttering. Since they had come to live in the house, life had been easy for them. House elves brought food, and Arthur, to keep them lively, had creature deliver live magical prey so they could hunt. A few of the bats had grown larger from the competition. Feeding them confirmed Arthur's suspicion why few kept Foodabats. The creatures ate prodigiously, and only a wealthy family with a ranch could afford them. The Foodabats now stood ready, loyal enough to Arthur that they regarded him as their master. Foodabats were only slave-like when food and lodging were guaranteed. Arthur, having chosen a moderate fragment of the stone, brought creature out into the first-floor hall. He had no real fear of Bernhard. Vampires relied on blood magic, which, in Arthur's view, could not match a top wizard. Even the house elves, who could cast instantly without wands, would be a major headache for a vampire. A year earlier, he might have had creature spirit Lockhart away. Now Arthur felt powerful enough that even if Bernhard had half Dumbledore's strength, he could still walk away. So Arthur opened the door and let them in. He wanted to see what a vampire would do against Foodabats. Vampires couldn't learn the Patronus charm, so the bats already had a major advantage. Bernhard entered with easy confidence. He expected to kill Arthur. He paused, however, the moment he saw the Foodabats, and Arthur let the door close again. "Professor Bernhard," Arthur called, keeping his distance, more than 10 meters. "What's the meaning of this?" Bernhard glanced around before answering slowly. "Mr. Black, I came specifically to find you." "And Lockhart?" Arthur asked. "What happened to him?" Bernhard grabbed Lockhart's hand and bit down. Lockhart's body swelled and filled out in seconds, muscle replacing the hollowed skin as he grew stronger. Bernhard said, "He's a blood slave, an old vampire technique, not unlike how the bloodline families work." "You know about the bloodline families, yes? Calling themselves something grand doesn't change what they are. When a vampire and an infected person exchange blood, if less than a third of the person's blood is replaced, they become one of those revived bloodline members. Blood slaves are worse. I feed them a little of my blood at intervals so they become addicted to it. That addiction lets me control them. I activated the blood I'd left in him. Lockhart's like this now, powerful, but with terrible side effects." "So that's why Lockhart was different when he founded the dueling club?" Arthur asked, thinking it through. Bernhard did not deny it. "Of course. To lure him into my trap, I had to let him taste a little sweetness." "Why choose him?" Arthur said. "He was useless as a wizard to begin with. Even with enhanced strength, if he can't use real magic, what good is he?" Lockhart's mind still flickered with awareness, but he couldn't control his body. Arthur's blunt assessment set him off. Animalistic growls escaped him. Bernhard slapped him until he ceased, then continued. "I told you before that Dumbledore and I were friends. We have 2 other mutual acquaintances. One of them had his memory wiped by Lockhart. When I went to see him last year, he didn't even remember me. So I told Dumbledore and had Lockhart called to Hogwarts to teach defense against the dark arts. You know whose curse did strange things. Lockhart hadn't lived the tales he wrote, but he knew things indirectly. I didn't expect that curse would strip him of caution when he faced someone like me." Arthur nodded. He had no need to press further about Lockhart. He asked directly, "Bernhard, why are you here?" Bernhard's face hardened, and murderous intent showed without restraint. "What do you think? I'm here to kill you." Emit 92, The Power of Thor. At Bernhard's command, Lockhart was the first to engage the Fudabats, but neither side could gain the upper hand. Unlike Dementors, the Fudabats had bodies. When they attacked, they used them to bind and entangle. That gave Lockhart, who couldn't cast a Patronus, some chance to struggle. His enormous strength let him tear free from their grips, but he couldn't hurt them. He could only hold off 2 or 3 at a time. Bernhard watched the creatures with a hint of admiration. "As expected," he said, "you've even subdued Fudabats. Before this, only Gellert managed, though he used a special fiend fire." Gellert Grindelwald? At the name, Arthur tightened his hold on the Philosopher's Stone fragment. "Is he another mutual friend of yours and Dumbledore's?" Bernhard nodded. "Yes, but Dumbledore doesn't know about this. I wasn't involved in Gellert's affairs before." "Then this visit, was it Grindelwald's intention?" Arthur's face went serious. If it were just Bernhard the vampire, he could handle it. Grindelwald was different. One of the 3 most powerful wizards in the current world, Grindelwald was beyond Arthur's ability to beat. Arthur had learned a great deal of magic and even invented some spells. Among his peers, he considered himself the undisputed number 1. But he knew, even without facing them, that Dumbledore, Lord Voldemort, and Grindelwald were opponents he could not match. Grindelwald had been easily killed by Voldemort in the original tale because of physical frailty and perhaps other factors. Voldemort had the means to reshape his body. Grindelwald could potentially do the same and regain real strength at will. Arthur's own reserves were limited. The Philosopher's Stone fragments could only buy him a momentary edge. In a prolonged fight, he'd lose. In practice, even controlling the stone's power sapped mental energy, let alone dodging an enemy's spells and casting his own. Bernhard answered Arthur's question with a nod and then a shake of the head. "My trip to Hogwarts was Gellert's idea. He thinks highly of you and wanted me to make initial contact, but I refused. He is a wizard. I am a vampire. If he overthrows the ministry, vampires will be in a worse position. I want victory for my kind, something not unlike that Eye of Truth group that has recently appeared. I met him once before coming here. He told me he had seen something in the future, something perhaps involving you, and he wanted to use you for it. I reported him not long after and planned to come and kill you." Arthur didn't fully trust Bernhard. He hadn't expected to, but he wanted him dead. He ordered the remaining Fudabats to close in on Bernhard. "So you think you can kill me?" he said. "I don't agree with everything Grindelwald proposes, but I do believe in wizard supremacy. Only wizards have that kind of power in the magical world. Having a position you aren't suited for isn't good when you can't back it up." Bernhard smiled. "Gellert is better at manipulating people than you are, but even he couldn't persuade me. And what about your earlier request to buy my island? What I told you about that was true, but I had no intention of actually using your island. It was an excuse to get close. You are very guarded. Wasn't my being a vampire initially what interested you most? Now let me show you the true power of a vampire." He reached out toward Lockhart, still fighting. In an instant, Lockhart's body exploded. Blood spattered the air and, under Bernhard's control, began to swirl around him like a set of halos. Arthur, having expected violence from the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, was only mildly surprised at Lockhart's death. What shook him was Bernhard himself. The vampire now radiated dense, tangible magic. Vampires did not seem as weak as common lore suggested. Against an average aura of this era, Bernhard was easily superior. Arthur ordered the Fudabats to envelop Bernhard. 9 of them wrapped him tight. Bernhard was bound like a black mummy. Arthur knew that the Fudabats alone wouldn't hold him. If they had been Dementors, Bernhard might not have broken free, but he needed time. This was the first time he had used the magic he'd developed in real combat, and he felt a rush of excitement. He wanted to know what his new spells could do. He held his wand in his left hand and began to cast his modified Patronus charm. In his right hand, the Philosopher's Stone fragment flashed with white lightning. His new magic combined lightning magic and soul magic into what he called the Soul Guardian. It was tailor-made for this situation. Arthur currently maintained two soul shells. The main one, the giant, housed his true soul and could not be harmed. The other, the unicorn, was his former soul shell and could repair itself slowly with the giant's power if damaged. Arthur had modified the Patronus charm to project the giant soul shell as a protective barrier for his true soul, while the soul guardian could summon the unicorn shell to fight. With both active, his soul would be preserved even under extreme strain. From within the black-wrapped mummy came Bernhard's voice. "Patronus charm? Mr. Black, I am neither a dementor nor a feudabat. I was a little worried at first, but it seems you're only a child. Even a genius is useless." The humanoid mummy swelled. It shrank, curling into a tight sphere, then expanded again, breaking the feudabat's hold and slipping free. Arthur let Bernhard go. He knew the feudabats had only delayed him. He didn't bother to hide the innovation in his magic. Bernhard would see it soon enough. A winged unicorn coalesced before Arthur, bright and real. Behind him, a giant nearly 3 meters tall took shape, translucent but massive. Both were entwined in lightning, though the unicorn seemed more solid. Arthur spread his hands, controlling the soul guardian in front and the Patronus behind. His unicorn wand floated at his side. The lightning-infused power he commanded churned the sky above Black Manor into brooding clouds, the air heavy and oppressive. A blinding bolt of lightning tore through the gathering clouds and slammed into the giant Patronus. Thunder cracked like a god's roar. The giant swelled, growing rapidly from 3 meters to nearly 20. The first strike intensified the storm. Countless tiny forks of lightning descended like writhing dragons, ravaging the earth. Trees and shrubs within range were struck and turned to ash in an instant. The feudabats, terrified, scattered and hid. In that storm of thunder and lightning, Arthur could have been a thunder god descended. Golden veins ran along the shaft of his unicorn wand, pulsing with electric light like a scepter of storms. White arcs of electricity danced in his eyes as he stood on the steps looking down. Bernhard's face, for the first time since they had arrived, showed genuine terror. 93. The crushed vampire professor. In Bernhard's eyes, Arthur was no longer a mere boy wizard. He looked like a demon. Since ancient times, where had there been a wizard this young who could command such raw power? The surge of magic and the crackling lightning that exploded through the Black Manor rivaled, in Bernhard's mind, the strength of Grindelwald himself. He had the sudden urge to beg for mercy. But when he looked at Arthur's youthful face, the words stuck in his throat. He was a vampire who had lived for centuries. He could not bring himself to plead to a child. Before Bernhard could decide what to do, Arthur moved. Arthur was feeling it too. It was the first time he had tried to channel such a huge amount of power from fragments of the Philosopher's Stone, and it taxed him severely. To feed the Patronus with that lightning, the magic had to pass through his body. The flood of power produced a sensation like blood rushing upward. His head swam, and dizziness prickled his thoughts. Despite the strain, whether Bernhard begged or not made no difference. Arthur intended to end it. He extended his right hand slowly. The giant soul guardian behind him mirrored the motion, but with a crucial difference. A massive globe of white lightning formed in its palm. The guardian swung its hand, and the blinding ball of energy hurtled toward Bernhard like a meteor. The air around the sphere sizzled. Every hair on Bernhard's body rose. He forced his mind steady and summoned the blood halo that always wreathed a vampire of his stature, thrusting it up to intercept the lightning orb while he darted away. The blood barrier bought him a few vital seconds, enough time for a vampire's enhanced physique to flee. The lightning ball smashed into the ground in front of the manor with a dull, catastrophic thud, gouging a crater nearly 10 meters wide, splintering flagstones and bricks outward. The earth around the impact was blackened as if scorched. Outside the Black Manor, the shock produced screams. The ancestral house sat in a busy Muggle neighborhood. The blast rattled windows and shattered panes for blocks. Terrified Muggles stumbled into the street, bewildered by the sudden concussion. Inside, Bernhard, having evaded that first strike, counterattacked as he fled, his voice laced with contempt. "Mr. Black," he sneered, "it seems your battle sense is still lacking. Such raw power should be bound with restraining spells. You're still young. No one can continuously unleash this level of magic without consequence." Vampires outclass wizards in physicality. In strength and speed, they leave most wizards behind. Wizards, without magic, are only as fit as an athletic muggle, only tougher because they can be healed or bolstered by magic. A vampire like Bernhard, augmented by blood magic, could cross 100 meters in 4 or 5 seconds. Once he closed, he could pierce a wizard's abdomen with his bare hands. In a nighttime alley ambush, many aurors would be outmatched by such creatures. Arthur was no ordinary auror. As Bernhard charged, a short spear lanced from Arthur's side, his unicorn horn wand, hurled like a cavalry lance and guided by Charlotte's control, struck first. The lightning-tinged horn drove through Bernhard and pinned him to the courtyard wall. The speed and precision of the strike left no time for reaction. Arthur flicked his right hand and began to dissipate the giant soul guardian from the bottom up. The immense white form collapsed into a flowing stream of light that passed through his hand. As it passed, the white became blackened and streaked with veins of red. The stream thickened and changed its nature. The lightning transmuted from yang into yin and coiled around Bernhard like living tentacles, snaking into every orifice, mouth, ears, nostrils, forcing its way into his body. At first, Bernhard managed to scream, but the lightning had already ravaged his insides. His vampiric constitution kept his heart beating, but he was grievously damaged. When the yin lightning had finished its work, Arthur dismissed the unicorn horn guardian. "This is disappointing," Arthur said, voice cool. "Either I overestimated you, or I underestimated the fragments in my own power. For a vampire who's lived 100 years, you're remarkably fragile, and I still haven't used half my spells." Bernhard could not answer. He lay on the ground as if hollowed out, a living corpse. The unicorn horn floated back to Arthur and fluttered, a small, proud motion that seemed to celebrate the feat it had just accomplished. Creature, who had followed behind Arthur, stared with adoration. The Feutabats that had cowered in the corners during the fight crept out now, eyes wide with awe. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the cost was clear. The black ancestral home was ruined. The back of the house and part of the garden remained less damaged, but the main structure was no longer habitable. Many rooms had been contained with undetectable extension charms, and when struck by a force like that, those magically expanded spaces were unstable. Arthur, only 12 years old and already so powerful, decided he would not try to salvage this place. He intended to rebuild a new, grander black manor in a more suitable location, somewhere like Hogwarts, with plenty of natural scenery and room to freely practice magic. It would be comfortable, secure, and expansive. With Creature to manage the household and the promise of learning apparitions soon, daily concerns would be minimal. Not long after Arthur dealt with Bernhard, aurors from the British Ministry of Magic sealed off the area. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, even came down to the scene himself. He stood among broken glass and cracked brick and demanded angrily of the head of the Auror office, "What's going on here? Blast it. How many muggles are we going to have to deal with because of this?" "It's probably either powerful spell practice or a duel between wizards," the head of the Auror office replied. Fudge tugged at his collar and spat a little as he snapped. "Then why haven't you rounded them up? This kind of thing should get them shipped off to Azkaban for a while." The head pulled him aside and lowered his voice. "If I'm not mistaken, this is the Black family home." Fudge glanced at the aurors around them and whispered back, "The Blacks? That Black?" "The Black family, the House of Black. They have at least a fifth of the Ministry's wizards in their pockets." Fudge dabbed sweat from his face with a handkerchief. His anger disappeared as quickly as it had flared. "Well, in that case, this is likely a misunderstanding. Mr. Black must have his reasons. Come on, we should go in and see whether he needs assistance." He did not dare underestimate Arthur Black. The wizards linked to the House of Black were enough to give him a perpetual headache. Add the near ties between the Blacks and the Malfoys, and he could find himself politically isolated overnight. Fudge had become minister by luck, and the prospect of antagonizing two such powerful families terrified him more than any quarrel with Dumbledore. He rapped on the door of the Black home. Arthur opened it quickly. He had known the ministry would come. Everyone who entered went pale. The front courtyard and the main house were almost entirely ruined. the damage far worse than anything Fudge had seen, even when hearing of Sirius blowing up a whole street full of muggles. The force of the destruction suggested that, had it happened publicly, there could have been hundreds of casualties. A swarm of bats hovered in the room, circling the newcomers as though deliberating whether to attack. Fudge, shaken, called, "Mr. Black, we're here to investigate what happened. The Ministry will have the muggles in the area obliviate their memories." Arthur waved, and the bats fell back. He offered an apology to Fudge. "I'm sorry, Minister. I've only recently tamed these bats. They still have a little of their wildness." "That's all right," Fudge said rapidly, wiping his face and stepping forward to shake Arthur's hand. "We only want to understand what happened. If this was the Ministry's fault, we'll correct it." As he did, his foot crushed something soft. An eyeball burst beneath his shoe. Fudge looked down and felt his stomach drop. Without the bats to obscure his view, the ground around his feet was a horror of bone fragments and torn, mingled flesh. For the first time since meeting Dumbledore, he felt a nausea that made him want to vomit. He had been an Auror in his youth and had seen violence, but nothing like this. Arthur, despite not yet even being in his third year, looked almost unnervingly calm. Sirius had been similarly composed after his previous atrocity. Were all members of the House of Black mad? The thought made Fudge queasy. In truth, Arthur had not been as composed as he seemed. Immediately after dealing with Bernhard, he had relaxed, looked at Lockhart's exploded body, and been sick against a wall. Bernhard, half dead from the encounter, had died while Arthur cleaned himself. The scale of what had happened was enormous. Arthur's magic had torn apart things in a way Fudge had only glimpsed in old films. Lockhart's ruined body lay where it lay. The popped eye Fudge had stepped on had once been one of the eyes that had charmed so many women. The man slumped in the corner was Walter Bernhard, the vampiric history of magic professor from Hogwarts. Arthur spoke and explained the scene briefly. Lockhart's eyes were what Fudge had crushed. Bernhard was the strange, slumped vampire, and much of the surrounding destruction was the result of ancient magical items that had long been stored in the Black House. Fudge listened, face grave. "Mr. Black, a Hogwarts professor attacking a student is a very serious matter. I may need the vampire's body for examination." Arthur cut in. "He's a vampire. He's as dead can be. You can't extract anything useful from him." He didn't want to reveal what he had used in the fight. Ordinary lightning magic was one thing, but the thunder giant Patronus-style lightning he'd employed, a technique that had consumed a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone, was another matter entirely. If word of that power spread, dark wizards seeking profit would stake out his house. Besides, there were already constraints on extracting memories from non-human magical creatures like vampires. Bernhard's corpse had been dead for a while, and Arthur had destroyed much of the brain with his yin lightning. Even the Ministry's Pensieves would find little to salvage. Fudge hesitated, his mind racing between suspicion that Arthur might be hiding evidence and the implausibility that a single vampire could cause such ruin. The damage fit better with rogue artifacts from the Black family's vaults than with the actions of one professor. After a long moment, he said, "Perhaps only Professor Dumbledore can handle this. The ramifications are too great. Maybe he, and he alone, can resolve this." 95. Arthur Black is a good wizard. When Dumbledore at Hogwarts learned what had happened to Arthur, he was deeply shocked. Never in Hogwarts history had a professor openly gone to a student's home with the intent to kill him. The dead vampire's memories could not be retrieved, but Hogwarts had an artifact that could help, the Pensieve. The Pensieve could not draw memories from the deceased, but it could extract Arthur's memories and show them to others. Dumbledore brought the Pensieve to the Black family mansion. It was carved from stone, its surface etched with ancient runes and mysterious symbols. The basin was filled with a silvery, cloud-like substance, part liquid, part vapor, that made the Pensieve work. Wizards could place memories into it for others to view, or to sort their own chaotic thoughts. Dumbledore asked Arthur to deposit his memory of the events into the basin. Arthur predictably left out the magic he'd used, storing only the memory of Walter Bernhard and Gilderoy Lockhart arriving at his door. He also concealed anything related to Grindelwald. After watching that incomplete memory, Everyone present accepted Arthur's version. Professor Bernhard had come to kill Arthur, wounded Lockhart, and was killed in return. Memories are generally unreliable as evidence because they can be altered by magic. The memory charm is the simplest way to tamper with them, and while it usually leaves traces, powerful wizards can make alterations seamless. As a young wizard, Arthur should not have been able to render such changes perfectly, but a Revelio charm found no signs that Arthur had modified the memory. The fact that Arthur had used a Patronus against a vampire struck some ministry officials as odd, but Arthur's status as heir to the House of Black made the matter easier to close. The ruling held Walter Bernhard, the history of magic professor, had assaulted Gilderoy Lockhart and attempted to kill Arthur Black, and was killed in the resulting retaliation. Even so, Dumbledore paced and rubbed his temples. The whole affair had driven him to distraction. A professor had attempted to murder a student, and the student had killed the professor in return. Dumbledore did not believe Arthur's claim that he had used a magical artifact left by the House of Black. When he entered the mansion, he had noticed lingering traces of magic very similar to the energy he'd sensed on the Cerberus. Arthur had previously slain a crackling, lightning-like power. Judging by the level of destruction, Arthur now possessed enough strength to stand up to such force. Even if Arthur had used fragments of the Philosopher's Stone, those fragments only provide raw magical power, something Arthur, once of age, would naturally wield. More importantly to Dumbledore was the fact that yet another history of magic professor lay dead. Dumbledore began to suspect, half in jest and half in dread, that Arthur was a curse on Hogwarts' staff. In Arthur's first year, Professor Binns had died. In his second year, the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's resident ghost, had passed on. Now the new history of magic professor was dead. It wasn't Arthur's fault exactly, but Dumbledore worried about his own poor luck in selecting colleagues. He would have to find not just a new defense against the dark arts professor, but a new history of magic professor as well. The thought of replacing two staff members in succession and how that might drive potential candidates away gave him a headache. Hogwarts' professors were dying at an alarming rate, more than some aurors on dangerous missions, and parents would surely have many complaints. After spending a few minutes comforting Arthur, an exhausted Dumbledore left. His approach to raising Arthur was entirely different from his approach to Harry. In Dumbledore's view, Arthur was nearly flawless, talented, capable, and only a little arrogant and inexperienced. Arthur was composed in the face of the incident, and Dumbledore allowed him freedom to develop. He even trusted Arthur with things like fragments of the Philosopher's Stone. If it had been Harry, Dumbledore would never have handed such artifacts to him, nor allowed him access to certain magics. Dumbledore's trust stemmed from perspective. Arthur as Dumbledore saw him differed from Arthur as others did. Even someone who could read hearts could only see parts of him. In the wider wizarding world, Arthur, descended from a notorious dark family and one of Britain's oldest bloodlines, was a surprising figure. He showed no obvious affinity for the dark arts. He was not cruel or arrogant and did not bully others. To most wizards, he seemed a noble young master, kind-hearted and upright. Of course, the reality was more complex. Arthur didn't disdain the dark arts because they were immoral. He simply found other magics more efficient. If he had pursued dark arts to their fullest, he could have gone to Durmstrang, studied under Grindelwald, and inherited great power. But he chose otherwise. When the others had left, Arthur told Kreacher to do what he could to tidy the ruined Black ancestral home. While cleaning, he found an old map of Britain that marked the lands owned by the House of Black, complete with moving photographs. Arthur examined each estate and finally selected a valley in northwestern Wales. The valley was remote and picturesque, ringed by high mountains with deep ravines and abundant waterways. Peaks rose into the clouds, dense forests cloaked some summits, while others jutted up as strange rocky outcrops. A tall waterfall fed several streams that converged into a medium-width river and formed a lake several hundred meters across at the valley's entrance. The nearest Muggle towns were several kilometers away, making it ideal for a wizard's residence. With Galleon funding backing the restoration, countless wizards and some squibs began to build a new Black manor in the valley. As for Arthur, Since his ancestral home had been ruined, he left for France early, putting some distance between himself and the rubble while preparations for the new estate proceeded. A manor not far from the ruins of Nurmengard in Austria. Gellert Grindelwald, who had been imprisoned for decades, had left Nurmengard for the first time. His wizarding supremacist party had gathered again, though only a handful remained. The men who had once brimmed with youthful conviction were now bent and frail. Some had lost their loyalty, others had died long ago. Among those present was an elegant old woman with hair like silver-spun silk, combed smoothly back from a face where time had left its marks, but had not entirely erased the beauty beneath. She smiled at Grindelwald the way she always had. Decades earlier, she had been his cool, noble aide, the French Rose, Vinda Rosier. "Sir," she said, concern pulling at the corners of her voice, "shouldn't we send someone to aid Arthur Black? Walter Bernhard is no ordinary vampire. A 12-year-old boy won't stand a chance against him." Grindelwald returned her look with a slow smile. "Vinda, don't worry. Black is the wizard I chose. He will deal with Bernhard. That cunning vampire never openly supported me. He feared the consequences if we failed, and when I truly fell, he quickly began collecting my old followers. 100 years of life wasted on short-sightedness." "Understood, sir." Vinda still looked uneasy. This was the first time he had left Nurmengard since Dumbledore had defeated him. Arthur was only 12. Bernhard was over a century old and fast as he was ruthless. For such a young wizard, a vampire was a frightening opponent. Grindelwald read the worry in her face and softened. "You know me, Vinda. I have seen him in the future. He will be all right. And besides, only by surviving Bernhard will I learn exactly how strong Black is now and how far he may go." Shortly after, news arrived from their contact in Britain, along with a small, wrapped parcel. "Bernhard is dead. Arthur Black unharmed. Black Manor badly damaged. Arthur claims ancient artifacts of the House of Black caused the destruction." The room brightened with eager smiles. Arthur's survival meant he had at least the strength of an Auror as they had known in their day. As for the claim about House of Black artifacts, Grindelwald scoffed inwardly. Such relics did not exist any longer. "Open the package," he said. Vinda stepped forward and unwrapped it. Inside lay Walter Bernhard's body, procured evidently through bribery of certain ministry officials. It had been sent for Grindelwald's purposes, resurrection. Age had taken Grindelwald's power. The changes of decades in prison and in his mind had eroded him. To pursue his ambitions again, he needed his old strength. The ritual required 3 things: his father's bone, a servant's flesh, and an enemy's blood. The first 2 were easy enough. Finding an enemy's blood was harder. Many of his enemies were dead or protected by the likes of Dumbledore. But Bernhard had betrayed him, had become an enemy by choice, and that made him exactly the material Grindelwald needed. Grindelwald bent over the corpse and read the magical residue. He was especially curious about the spellwork used to kill Bernhard. As his senses probed, a dark, tangled trace of curses and shadow revealed itself. "Is this some branch of the dark arts even I haven't seen?" he murmured, a smile touching his lips. "Sir, as our intelligence said," Vinda replied, "Black has never been known to use the dark arts, not among the professors or students at Hogwarts." "Then our chosen one hides more than he lets on," Grindelwald said softly. "I wonder if Albus knows." Vinda prepared what remained to be done. She drew some fresh blood from Bernhard's body, placed the prepared bone of Grindelwald's father into a great cauldron, and without flinching, cut a thick slice of flesh from her own arm. When the last ingredient was in place, Grindelwald began the incantation. Black smoke rose from the cauldron in slow, oily eddies. Minutes later, the old man's body sagged. His soul, by their rights, slipped into the waiting mixture. From the pooling blackness, a young body surged upward. Short white hair, a frame restored, the presence they all knew returned. Vinda and the others watched as their familiar leader reclaimed vigor. Grindelwald flexed the new limbs, feeling the unfamiliar strength and balance. He reached out for Vinda's wounded arm and, with a flick and a soft word, mended the flesh where she had cut it. Satisfied, he had his old husk wrapped and stored away. He turned to the gathered few and smiled, the old grandeur returning to his bearing. "From today," he said, "we begin again. Let us be the dawn for the wizarding world. Brief it may be, but bright enough." 97. Arrival in France. After registering with the Ministry of Magic, Arthur went to the French Ministry of Magic from Britain's ministry. The French ministry looked much like the British one, only with a more diverse population. As he stepped into the main hall, his uncle Antoine Francois was already waiting. Antoine was a tall man of about 30, with tawny, slightly curly hair and a square face set on a firm jaw that made him look not to be trifled with. When he saw Arthur, he laughed, stepped forward to hug him, threw an arm around his shoulder and said, "You've finally arrived. You didn't come last year, and in 2 years you've grown so tall." He even compared their heights. Arthur could now reach his uncle's chest. "It's been a long time, Antoine. In a few more years, I might be taller than you." That's true. Kids these days grow fast. When they left the ministry, they went to Woodcroft, France's version of Hogsmeade, the only village in France inhabited exclusively by witches and wizards. Woodcroft was noticeably larger than Hogsmeade. France's native wizard population was roughly comparable to Britain's, but France had many wizards from other parts of continental Europe, Africa, and beyond. Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic was the largest school in Europe, and Woodcroft, which sat next to Beauxbaton's, naturally served a larger community. The Francois family home was near Woodcroft for business convenience. After chatting for a while at the Francois residence, Antoine grew more serious. "Arthur, don't wander too far these days. Be especially careful in Paris." "What's happening, Antoine? Has the situation in Eastern Europe escalated?" Arthur asked. "Exactly. It's them. For some reason, a lot of vampires have flooded into Paris over the last few days. They haven't technically broken ministry law, so the Aurors can only increase surveillance for now." Like Arthur, Antoine believed in wizard supremacy, though his reasons were different. He valued the bloodlines and prestige of wizarding families. Arthur's view was more pragmatic. Other magical beings simply lacked the organized power of wizards. Wizards could cooperate and cast collective spells that produced effects greater than the sum of their parts, while non-wizard magical beings fought more individually and rarely achieved comparable force. Antoine was particularly annoyed by vampires and werewolves. In business, they were the only groups who could rival wizards, and sometimes Antoine had to pay protection or be extorted for rare items. "Are there only vampires in Paris? Haven't their arch-enemies, the werewolves, moved in too?" Arthur asked. "Normally, as rivals, if one side shifted forces, the other would at least send scouts." Antoine frowned. "I haven't heard anything about werewolves. That's odd. Have they just stayed quiet?" "It seems another force is involved. The ministries shouldn't be doing this, especially not the French ministry." "Then maybe it's the Eye of Truth," Antoine guessed. "They've been causing trouble lately, and some wizards here have fallen under their influence." Arthur was surprised. "Hasn't the French ministry banned them?" Antoine shook his head, a little helpless. "There are too many of them to catch. It's just like Grindelwald's wizarding supremacist party before. Many wizards act of their own accord, not simply persuaded. You know how Muggle power has been rising. The Second World War shocked the wizarding world. Recently, a war in the Muggle world, the Gulf War, made a lot of wizards rethink our position. Many feel that if there were an open war with Muggles, the wizards' chances of winning are getting smaller." "And what do you think?" Arthur asked. Antoine hesitated, then said, "Honestly, like many others, I think it's better to strike first. Control certain high-ranking Muggles and let wizards lead. I've only heard, that some Muggle countries have developed technologies that can counter our magic. If that's true, given the Muggles' numbers, we'd be in trouble." He looked at Arthur. "What would you do?" Arthur felt uncertain. In his previous life, he had been an ordinary Muggle. Now, he was a wizard. The question of how to deal with the Muggle world troubled him. He had considered alternatives: keep wizards as a sort of aristocracy or elite, reveal ourselves slowly through novels, films, and other media to prepare Muggles for the truth, so as not to cause mass panic. Squibs were essentially like Muggles, but with knowledge of magic. If the barrier between worlds broke, Squibs would simply become Muggles, and perhaps their descendants might have a slightly higher chance of producing wizards. But many uncertainties remained. High-ranking Muggles might resist, radicals might want to exterminate wizards, and there could be underground groups always on guard. And what about non-human magical creatures? If muggles learned about infectious beings like vampires or werewolves, could that cause wider outbreaks? Arthur couldn't resolve these questions. For now, he thought, the powerful would bear the brunt of whatever came. As a lesser wizard, he had little say. He sighed. I don't know either, but in any case, we shouldn't die. The worst case is hiding out on an island somewhere. Antoine raised his glass and drank deeply. You're right. When it happens, we'll just hide, and the muggles won't find us. Then we deal with them country by country. Over the next few days, Arthur stayed with Antoine and explored the area. Compared to the relatively insular British wizarding world, the French scene had many more curiosities. The shops in Woodcroft were full of items he had never seen in Britain. 98. Fleur Delacour. After a few days of rest, Arthur prepared to visit Paris. Fleur Delacour's family was from there. Apart from those hiding in remote places, most French witches and wizards were gathered either near Beaubaton Academy in the Pyrenees or around the Ministry of Magic in Paris. Fleur's father held a post at the ministry. The Delacour family had been rooted in the French ministry for over a century and were one of the country's more influential names. As Arthur was leaving Woodcroft, Antoine warned him again, "Be careful. There are a lot of vampires in Paris now, and werewolves have started to show up too. Getting bitten by either of them is no small thing." "Don't worry, Antoine. Baru's coming with me. If anything happens, he'll get me out straight away. Besides, I'm going straight to Fleur's house this time. Nothing's going to happen," Arthur said. He took the magic train from Woodcroft to Paris, a route much like the Hogwarts Express, and watched the countryside slip by. On the way, he overheard other French wizards talking about the vampires and the werewolves. The recent events had made a big splash. Just as the British wizarding newspapers had once discussed Harry the Boy Who Lived, the French papers had been full of stories about these uninvited guests for days. In the meantime, werewolves, who hadn't been seen in the city before, had also appeared. Ministry teams had captured a number of fighting vampires and werewolves, and interrogations revealed why they had gathered in Paris. Both groups were searching for a particular muggle said to possess both vampire and werewolf ancestry. The story had hit the muggle press too for reasons no one could explain, and that only made things worse. Wizards speculated wildly. If vampire and werewolf blood could be combined, what about other magical lines? Could wizarding bloodlines merge with non-magical ones? Paris had become restless. Every evening, vampires and werewolves prowled the streets, aurors close behind, and some suggested expelling all such creatures from the city and sealing it off until order was restored. The numbers were simply overwhelming. When the train arrived in Paris, Arthur left the station, and after winding his way through the streets for more than 10 minutes, reached the Delacour family home. He hadn't seen Fleur in 2 years. Like him, she had changed, though while his change had been mostly a little extra height, hers was more striking. At 3 years older than Arthur, she had come into herself. He felt, somewhat oddly, that his virtual pen pal had finally grown up. Fleur, a quarter vila, was striking, skin pale as milk, a delicate face framed by waist-length hair that shimmered with a silvery sheen, and emerald eyes that flashed like jewels. She had inherited her grandmother's vila blood, and the combination of her refined features and curving figure made her impossible to miss in a crowd. Gabrielle, her younger sister, looked much like a delicate little princess. She too had a quarter vila's blood, but carried it in a softer, more childlike way. There was a little awkwardness when they first met, but Gabrielle's jokes dissolved it quickly, and they slipped back into the easy banter of old friends. They talked, played wizard's chess, and the hours flew by until evening. Mr. and Mrs. Delacour, who had been working all day at the ministry and were exhausted by the vampire situation, returned home. Their tired faces brightened when they saw Arthur. In their eyes, he was a kind of perfect child, talented, well-mannered, and perhaps, in time, the right sort of match for their daughter. In their view, Arthur's status, position, and aptitude made him an ideal fit. Over dinner, Mr. Delacour suggested, "Fleur, take Arthur out to see Paris for the next few days, but be back in the evenings. It's not very safe after dark." "I want to go too," Gabrielle piped up. Mr. Delacour gave her a look. "Where would you go? Summer isn't for running off. Your sister and Arthur were always top of their class at school. They can go because their grades earned it. When you get top marks, or at least pass math, then you can go out. Gabrielle pouted. I'm trying, but it's like the numbers run away from me. Then study harder. If you don't understand something, ask Fleur. Humph. You always have a reason for everything, Gabrielle grumbled, but she finished her meal quickly and ran off to her room. Fleur said she'd go comfort her, and Arthur excused himself as well, feeling a little awkward being the only guest left at the table. The next day, after the Delacours had gone to work, Gabrielle still got her wish. She joined Fleur and Arthur for an outing. Mr. Delacour was strict and rarely gave her pocket money, so when Arthur came to Paris, he often spoiled her with presents, one more reason she wanted to spend time with him. The little girl wore a pretty dress and held Arthur's hand in one palm and Fleur's in the other as she skipped along the pavement. Arthur, Gabrielle said suddenly, you should write to my sister more. She's always so happy when she gets your letters. You didn't used to write much, but you've written more this past year. No problem. I'll write more from now on, Arthur promised, but his gaze lingered on Fleur. He had several reasons for writing less in the past. His life had been mostly study, study, and more study, and he didn't want to burden her with tales of Lord Voldemort or the oddities of Professor Binns. Lately, though, he'd written more, partly because of the Mirror of Ericid's influence, and partly because he was starting to mature. He told himself he wasn't writing more out of some crude interest in her pale thighs or silver hair. It was the innocent pull of childhood affection and a kind of fate that had kept them in one another's thoughts. 99. Werewolves and Vampires at Night. Paris had a kind of romance to it that the guidebooks only ever hinted at. Arthur, having been there before, steered the group away from the tourist routes. They spent the day wandering the streets around the French Ministry of Magic instead. Like London's Diagon Alley, Paris had its own hidden shopping lane for wizards, the Lost Street. Its name promised a place where you were likely to lose your way, a winding row of shops that shifted as often as their owners' fortunes. Because wizards from all over set up stalls there, the shop fronts changed constantly. A place he'd seen a month ago could be unrecognizable now. The entrance to the Lost Street was tucked beneath a statue of a woman and surrounded by Muggle businesses. Wizards had to slip in themselves, timing a moment when they wouldn't be noticed by the passing Muggles. Though being seen wasn't the end of the world. Aurors often kept watch nearby and would remove any inconvenient memories. Inside, the street was a menagerie of curiosities, long-standing bookshops and wand-makers alongside ephemeral stalls and exotic boutiques that seemed to appear and vanish overnight. A casual stroll around the Lost Street bled into noon. The three of them found somewhere to eat. French food, Arthur decided, was richer and more varied than anything back in Britain. After lunch, they shopped until evening, returning with bags of various sizes. Gabrielle was incandescent with happiness and barely tired after a day of walking. Arthur, on the other hand, felt the small, honest ache of sore calves. That night, the Delacours came back exhausted. The city's vampire population had spiked in recent days, and the creatures had been bolder than usual. They'd captured more vampires that day than in the whole of the previous year. Delacour outlined the recent trouble with a frown. Arthur felt a prickle of unease, too. He hoped the unrest wouldn't spur anything on the scale of Grindelwald's burning of Paris. Modern Muggle technology would make covering up a disaster like that much harder than it had been back then. Just after midnight, an Auror knocked on the Delacour door to ask Mr. Delacour to come in on overtime. "Director," the Auror said, "those vampires and werewolves are causing trouble again. Orders just came down from above. Capture them and drive them out of Paris. They can't be allowed to remain exposed to Muggle eyes." Mr. Delacour dressed immediately. "Excellent. I've wanted to clear them out for ages. They've been a constant nuisance." As he spoke, an explosion sounded in the distance. The group shared a look. Mr. Delacour hurried inside to give Fleur a few quick instructions, then apparated away. Arthur and Fleur had already been awake. At the sound of the explosion, they went upstairs to guard Gabrielle's room. Gabrielle slept on, completely unaware of the commotion. Fleur watched her daughter's peaceful face and said, "Arthur, there may be danger tonight. We're right by the ministry, and those werewolves and vampires might resist." Arthur took Fleur's hand without hesitation. It's all right. I've learned a lot of magic lately. Handling vampires and werewolves won't be a problem. Fleur's cheeks colored slightly. Is that so? Then you must protect us properly. They settled on a lounge chair by the window, where the moonlight pooled across the floor. The night was when vampires and werewolves were most dangerous. Arthur held Fleur's hand with one, keeping his wand ready with the other. It was a small comfort to have a human connection while the shadows outside brimmed with menace. Several kilometers away, a man named Michael ran. He was being hunted by both vampires and werewolves, not for the first time in those days, but with more ferocity than before. Michael was no ordinary prey. He had been a human who, through a strange sequence of events, had come to carry both vampire blood magic and the physical gifts of a werewolf. His story was cruelly simple at first. His looks and kindness had drawn the attention of a female vampire who turned him. Later, in a clash between vampire and werewolf factions, a werewolf bit him. A bite that, under usual circumstances, would not infect a vampire. Vampire physiology often counteracted werewolf infection. Michael's case, however, was anomalous. The bite and the vampire transformation together left him with a hybrid set of attributes: vampire blood control and the enhanced physique and superb regeneration of a werewolf. In this world, the supernatural species diverged somewhat from the legends. Vampires came in two kinds: the full vampires and those known as blood relatives who hadn't completed the transformation. Full vampires wielded blood magic but could not perform wizard magic. Blood relatives mostly had enhanced physical abilities. Werewolves were less split by origin. Every werewolf was a werewolf. The main distinction was whether a person had been a wizard before becoming one. If they had been a wizard, they retained the potential to use magic after their change. If they had been a muggle, they could not. Transformations could occur any night, and the full moon forced the change. Wizard-turned werewolves found it harder to keep their sanity when transformed, and in any transformed state, a werewolf could not use magic. In terms of raw combat, werewolves outmatched vampires in regeneration, speed, and defense. But werewolves often lost lucidity after transforming, and that decline in mental control could make them less effective fighters. Myths had also been misremembered. Silver did not kill them. It was only relevant in treating or dealing with the wounds they caused. And sunlight did not immolate a vampire outright. Vampires weakened beneath sunlight. It drained them. Blood relatives, however, suffered far worse. Sunlight scarred them severely and could even be fatal with prolonged exposure. Because of these weaknesses and strengths, vampires and werewolves operated primarily at night, and their battles usually erupted after dark, when both sides were at their most dangerous. Michael's hybrid condition made him a prize neither faction wanted to kill. He represented potential, a pathway to raising a group's power ceiling, a model for stronger, faster soldiers. That made every faction willing to risk offending the most powerful wizards to capture him. If they had been willing to kill him outright, he would already be dead, but they wanted him alive. Tonight, with the city's dark corners rippling with hunters and hunted, that chase wound tighter than ever. 100. Grindelwald's misunderstanding. As werewolf and vampire attacks increased, muggles in Paris also began to suffer. Some only glanced outside their homes, but a disoriented werewolf would sometimes leap at them. The lucky ones died instantly. The unlucky survived with a lifetime of torment, missing limbs and ruined lives. Wounds sustained before a person transformed could not be healed by later lycanthropy. A victim who lost a limb at the hands of a werewolf would remain crippled after transforming and would be unable to take revenge. Those attacks shattered the fragile balance in Paris, and the wizards decided to intervene, sending aurors to round up the monsters. Michael, who had been running, somehow managed to slip out of the encirclement of vampires and werewolves through a string of unexpected events. He noticed, however, that his escape had been too smooth. Someone had been helping him. He was right. The one who had allowed him to get away was the leader of the pack hunting him, Lucien. Werewolves were split into two factions, those aligned with wizards and the ordinary packs. Lucien led the ordinary werewolves. He had watched Michael flee from a rooftop and stood beside a black-robed wizard who had his wand out. Lucien glanced at the wizard and said coldly, After this, it will have nothing to do with the werewolves. Many of my kin will be jailed or killed in this operation. I expect your boss to keep his promise." The wizard's tone was thinly mocking. "You got tangible benefits from this cooperation. Don't play the victim now." "Humph. I don't know what your goal is, but wizards have never cared for us," Lucian replied. With that, he turned and dropped into a shadowed alley, leaving without a sound. The wizard watched Michael disappear into the distance, then looked toward the vampires pursuing him and flicked his wand. Michael's right leg suddenly shattered, and he crashed to the ground, howling. His cries were abruptly cut off, his lips nearly torn, and the pain left him helpless. Even as a hybrid of vampire and werewolf, Michael would need at least a month to recover from such a broken leg, even with accelerated post-transformation healing. The vampires hunting him would not wait that long. Lying on the street, Michael realized the attack had come from a wizard. Only a wand could inflict damage so directly. He had no hope of fighting a wizard in that condition, so he played dead until the pursuers passed. But when no wizard or other creature came for him, he became curious. The scent of vampires grew stronger, and with no other choice, he did what he could. He splinted and bandaged the leg with torn clothing, dug a shallow pit, and covered the wound with earth, then crawled into a nearby house to hide. It was a desperate plan, but it might keep him from the vampire hunters. From a distance, the black-robed wizard smiled, produced a mirror, and spoke into it to the young Grindelwald reflected in the glass. "Sir, the mission is complete. Michael has entered the target house." He waved his wand once more and walked away. The whole affair involving Michael had been a collusion between Grindelwald's wizarding supremacist faction and certain werewolf packs. Half a month earlier, they had captured Michael out of curiosity. He was a rare vampire-werewolf hybrid. Grindelwald himself had taken tissue samples and bones, and then, with the werewolves' help, had bled Michael extensively to study him. They drained him repeatedly for 2 weeks. If not for Michael's exceptional constitution, he would have died. After the experiments, they released him and wiped his memory, making him believe he had been fleeing that whole time. In that manipulated state, Michael did as they planned and crawled into the house where Arthur was staying. Grindelwald, having received that intelligence, had stationed himself in a nearby hotel to watch. He favored Arthur, but thought the boy was still too young. Time was pressing. Muggle technology was advancing rapidly, and more governments had confirmed the existence of wizards and were beginning to track their movements. The spread of such technology would soon expose ordinary Muggles to the wizarding world. Grindelwald wanted Arthur to grow and be noticed quickly. Better for Arthur to be exposed to the wizarding world now than to remain hidden. Grindelwald knew Arthur's childhood friend from the Delacour family was nearby. To force an important exposure, he arranged for a situation that would compel Arthur to use the same dark magic he had once used on Bernhard's corpse. If Arthur had to protect someone important, Grindelwald reasoned he would not hesitate to unleash that power. There were 36 vampires within a kilometer of Arthur, and with the fight developing, more would converge. Grindelwald wanted to see how Dumbledore would respond if Arthur was forced to use that dark magic. According to the future Grindelwald had glimpsed, Arthur would still be at Hogwarts and would resist that ugly, noseless wizard. Dumbledore would therefore not brand him the next Lord Voldemort, and would instead intensify Arthur's training. That was precisely the outcome Grindelwald desired. With Voldemort still alive, and a distracted Dumbledore, the balance of power in the European wizarding world would favor his long-term scheme. The vampires, of course, were drawn to blood. Even though Michael had covered his bandages with soil, his scent betrayed him. The predators honed in quickly, and 35 vampires surrounded the house he had entered, calling for reinforcements to converge. Grindelwald had arranged other measures as well. Lucian had left to rally werewolves to wreak havoc elsewhere in Paris, sending some wizard-aligned werewolves to sow chaos and draw the Ministry's attention away. Compared with vampires, who needed blood exchanges to transform, the wizards feared werewolves' contagion more. Grindelwald had also quietly neutralized Arthur's house elf to ensure no one inside could warn the outside world. He wanted Arthur's hidden dark arts to be exposed. The vampires assembled in force were not the equal of Bernhard, whom Arthur had once defeated. Arthur was unlikely to die in this assault. Instead, Grindelwald had engineered the scene precisely to force Arthur into action and to make his talents visible to the rest of the wizarding world. Whether those who wanted to recruit Arthur did so by coercion, or whether Dumbledore chose to cultivate him, Grindelwald's manipulations would make either outcome more likely and serve his designs.